So with the import and export keywords and the related concepts, we already explored a bunch of crucial JavaScript concepts and features which we'll use heavily throughout this course. But of course, for this refresher, I now also want to take a step back and also explore some other foundational JavaScript features and concepts, like working with variables, values, functions, objects, and much more. And it definitely makes sense to start with variables, values, and operators. For that, in this app.js file, I'll comment out all this code we wrote before, because we don't need it here. And instead, I now do want to revisit some foundational concepts related to variables, values, and operators. Because in the end, when you're building an app with JavaScript, or with React, which uses JavaScript, of course, it's in the end all about data and therefore in the end values you're working with in your code. If you take a look at applications like Twitter or Google Maps, those apps, like all apps, of course, in the end are about data. The tweets you write and read are data, your location is data, the location you want to go to is data. All these things are data that must be handled in your code. And in your JavaScript code, you can therefore handle a broad variety of values. Most importantly, strings, numbers, booleans, the special null and undefined values, which simply mean that a certain data container, a certain variable, doesn't contain any values yet, and also the special object value, to which I'll get back later. Now, a value in JavaScript can be created in the place where you need it. For example, if I want to output hello world here, I can simply create the string hello world with double or single quotes, doesn't matter, but quotes are of course needed. And if I then save this and reload my app, I would see hello world in the console. So I can create values when I need them. For example, here, when I need a value as an input for this console log command that's built into the browser in the end. But it's also quite common that values should be stored, and for that you're using variables. Variables are simply data containers where you store a value in a variable, which carries any name of your choice, so you assign a name to a variable, and you can then use this variable name as an identifier in your code to refer to that value that's stored in this variable whenever you need to use that value. And you typically use variables because they allow you to reuse a value and because they can help with code readability. Because often it makes sense to not define the value in the place where it's needed, but maybe instead ahead of time so that your overall code stays a bit cleaner and more readable. Now in JavaScript, variables can be created with the let keyword. Here I could create a variable named user_message, though the name is up to you. It just should follow certain rules. For example, it should be written using this camel case notation, where you start with a lowercase character, and if your variable name then consists of multiple words, every word inside of the word, like message here, starts with a capital case character. And it must not contain any dashes or whitespace. So this variable name would be invalid, just as this name would be. Underscores would be allowed, but are not common in JavaScript. Instead, as mentioned, the convention is to use this notation. Variable names also may contain numbers, but not at the beginning. In addition, they also may not contain any special characters like an exclamation mark or a question mark. The only exception is the $sign and the underscore, which I already mentioned. But other than that, the name is up to you. And then I could store this hello world text in user_message. If I then want to use this value, for example here for logging it to the console, I would simply use the name of the variable and thereby refer to this value. And that's how I use a variable. And if I now want to log this multiple times, for example, I gain this reusability advantage by using a variable, because instead of having to copy and paste that value, I just define it once and then use that variable as often as I want to use that value. That has the advantage that if that value ever needs to change, I only need to change it in one place instead of multiple places, and all the places in my code where I use that variable will automatically use that changed value. With that, if I reload this, I of course see hello world being output in the console twice. So that's how we create variables. Now, related to variables, we also have constants, which are created with the const keyword. If I save this and reload, I again see hello world being output twice here. So constants work like variables. They are data containers, but the key difference is that constants must not be reassigned. If I try to assign a new value, a new string, for example, like this, I'm getting an error that it's read only because it's a constant. If I were using let here instead of const, everything would work instead. Now I would again see my log here in the console. So that's the key difference. With let, I can use this single equal sign operator to assign a new value. With const, I can't. Now, there are different philosophies out there in the JavaScript world. Certain developers like to use const as often as possible, and I'm one of those developers. Other developers want to use let all the time because it has less characters and therefore requires less code to type. But I prefer to be clear about my intentions, and if I have a value that never should be reassigned, I personally prefer to use const. You can use whatever you want, but you should know about the difference.